So officially good morning to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this webinar Wednesday. Food Focus tries to have a webinar every Wednesday, and this week we are so excited to be joined by a couple of really great guests that I'll be introducing to you shortly. And so let's just make sure. Today our sponsor is the BSI. Thank you so much to the British Standards Institution for working with us. We really appreciate you as a client. We're so excited to be able to do this kind of work with you. It's just amazing to work with an organization that has such a global presence and to be able to draw from their international expertise from all around the world. Today is very much a South African presentation because we're going to be looking at the SIZA audit protocol and how this affects the South African community, the South African farming community, and other links in the food chain. And so we're going to be having some great presentations. So there are two presentations today. The first will be done by a SIZA, and then we'll be chatting to the British Standards Institution. So first of all, let me introduce to you our speakers. Charlene Holm. Charlene, don't you want to come on camera so everyone can see that you do look like your picture? Charlene is the General Manager for the British Standards Institution. They are a global certification body and a trusted royal charter company. Charlene is dedicated, highly motivated. She sets very high standards. I've had the opportunity to work with Charlene on a number of occasions. She loves quality and ethical trade, and particularly as this includes environmental responsibility and the health and safety of employees. She's worked in industry for a long time. She's got key experience in conformity assessment standards. She's got industrial and personnel psychology qualifications, and she started her role as a certification manager and now the operations manager, and then being promoted to the general manager of the BSI. So Charlene will be talking to us a little later on how the BSI brand and business actually supports sustainability audits within South Africa. But their guest today is Werner van Dijk. So Werner, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you. And Werner is going to be starting our presentation today, and he's going to be taking us through some very interesting information about the SIZA audit protocol, how it works. So Werner, I'm going to hand over the screen to you. Thanks, Charlene. We'll chat to you a little bit later. And while I'm handing over to Werner, let me tell you a little bit about this young and dynamic individual. He has a passion for agriculture. He's got a very interesting qualification, a background in law and psychology. Sure, Werner, that's an interesting one. He has, I think we all expected that he would have his roots in an upbringing on a family farm in the Northern Cape. So he is a farmer by upbringing, but I think that's also helped, you know, in terms of what you do now as a career. His passion for agriculture really sort of started his move into the corporate social responsibility and joining the Sustainability Initiative of South Africa, SIZA. He joined them in 2018 as their ethical specialist and audit oversight, and he was responsible for ensuring continuous improvement within the auditing process. That just means it gets tougher and tougher. Hey, Werner, you just make the requirements tougher and tougher. He was formally appointed as their audit manager in 2019, and he's responsible for the ethical and the environmental departments. So Werner, over to you. I'm very, very interested to know more about SIZA and how this impacts on trade within South Africa. Over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, Charlene. Thank you for sitting on this panel with me. Like you said, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Sustainability Initiative of South Africa, or better known as SIZA, the program specifically towards the social compliance audit program, as well as the environmental sustainability. And then we're going to touch on some of the pitfalls or the main concerns that we are experiencing, in particular with South African suppliers. Just 2 seconds, unfortunately, my screen has...
Just click the mouse.
There we go.
There you go. You remember I told you it falls asleep from time to time. Off you go.
Thank
The
you.
screen.
So just to give you an understanding of the program, I think the most important question we need to ask is why the Sustainability Initiative of South Africa, or why SIZA? Why is it important that South African producers or people within the agricultural value chain actually belong to a sustainability program such as SIZA? I think the first and foremost thing that needs to be mentioned is that the program is built uniquely for South African circumstances. It is built on South African legislation, which makes it applicable to South Africans. It makes it relatable to South Africans. It is not necessarily just a global standard with global requirements without any interaction in terms of what South African agriculture or the South African value chain as a whole needs. It is aligned to international and local market standards and requirements in terms of social compliance. It takes into account the International Labour Organization and the UN conventions, but the program also caters for an agri-wide multi-sector. So it's not just necessarily built for the fruit sector as it started originally. It also includes commodities such as nuts, flowers, ornaments, ostriches, for example, spices, vegetables, and processing and food manufacturing facilities, which makes it a broad and multi-sector stakeholder program that drives continuous improvement. The program is an independent legal entity with experienced capacity and track record over the past little more than a decade now, and it provides assurance to the global markets and local buyers. The key to the SIZA program is its single audit approach. At the end of the day, the program drives a cost and time effective approach in order to save cost and save time for the producer or the auditee by offering a single audit on the ethical side and a single audit on the environmental side. So the aim is to avoid duplication in terms of the variety of audits or the variety of standards that, or the multiple standards, as a matter of fact, where certain businesses have to comply to each and every retailer requirement. SIZA steps in to say, listen, as a country, as a program, as a standard, we are very proud to say that we benchmark very equally to these global standards and retailer requirements. Therefore, if they belong to the program, if they complete the full compliance of the program, they get market access and acceptance with all these major retailers. At the end of the day, the program is there to manage risk and ensure continuous improvement for the producers. It's not just about doing the audit. It's not just about passing or failing an audit. In fact, it's not a pass or fail exercise, and it's all about driving a best practice approach and ensuring continuous improvement within that particular business. So this is done by means of an annual self-assessment questionnaire. It is fairly common in the social compliance industry, but it serves a vital, important role. So the role it serves is not only to serve as a benchmark for the producer or the business in terms of measuring their compliance in relation to minimum legislation or the code requirements, but it also serves as a monitoring tool for them. On an annual basis, they can monitor and track their performance, and they can see where their possible gaps lie in terms of social compliance and environmental sustainability. There's also a between audit monitoring program, which allows for a sample of businesses to be visited by the SIZA program, and at the end of the day also identify possible gaps in between audit validity periods where those businesses can then learn from it and at the end of the day implement the necessary corrective action. So the program ensures the creation of a safe working environment for all those working on farms, and it's very important. It's not just about agri-workers, for example. It's about effective communication between management and agri-workers throughout the value chain, going to processing facilities and pack houses. The SIZA program benchmarks their management practices against labor and environmental legislation requirements. So it's not just a program that drives continuous improvement, it also teaches the concept of continuous improvement and the aim towards best practice to its members. And it creates and ensures a credible supply from South Africa. At the end of the day, our aim is to minimize risk and offer confidence to global and local markets. So just to give you a glimpse into the SIZA membership, as I mentioned, is an agri-wide multi-sector program. Just to give you a little bit of an idea in terms of membership distribution, just in terms of fruit, quickly, just you'll see there's a graph there on the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll see that there's quite a big membership in pome and stone fruit and citrus as well. But if we look at the total membership, we have about 2,175 social members, and then also 1,342 businesses that are registered for the environmental standard and the environmental module. In terms of visibility and traceability, we share data on the Global Gap platform for about 1,164 members. So that is specifically for the European market. We have an MOU with Global Gap where data is shared, as well as with SEDEX, and 1,640 of the SIZA members also gain SEDEX visibility in terms of their social and environmental compliance, mainly for the UK and Americas. In terms of overall market acceptance, SIZA is accepted by 293 businesses in 20 countries across 3 visibility platforms. So the market acceptance is quite wide, which is quite a big benefit for the South African supply chain. In terms of the social standard and social compliance, the standard is built on 8 key principles, which is also benchmarked, like I mentioned earlier, with the ILO principles, and it also encompasses the entire UN conventions. So we look at responsible management systems and business ethics, forced and bonded labor, child labor and young workers, the legislation around freedom of association, and also important, of course, the freedom to disassociate. And we take into account discrimination, harassment and abuse, occupational health and safety throughout the business, responsible wages, payout of benefits and correct terms of employment, and then of course the responsible management of working hours. The most important aspect related to the SIZA social standard is that human rights flows throughout this standard, and it's very important to remember, as this forms the baseline for the South African Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and this is also something that is a major focal point for global buyers. In terms of the implementation of the SIZA social standard, you look at social third-party audits, which is conducted by SIZA recognized or approved audit firms and auditors, of which BSI is one who we've been walking a path with over the past few years, and very thankful for the great work that BSI have been doing. And the competency at the end of the day, not only for the audit firm such as BSI, but also for the auditors, is determined by SIZA. So there's a very strict competency requirements, which I'll touch on a little bit later as well. And the goal of the third-party audit is to measure performance against the SIZA social standard. We don't believe that it's only merely based on minimum labor legislation. It takes into account best practices and global requirements as well. The standard and compliance to the standard also ensures that you as a supplier gain market access, and this market access is gained by the outputs allowed by the SIZA program, specifically by the My SIZA platform, which gives you a very credible audit report and corrective action plan, which is issued within about 10 days after the audit has been completed. This audit report is then shared on the various platforms as explained earlier. But the most important part of this process I would like to highlight is the corrective action process. And this is where this continuous improvement and drive towards a best practice approach steps in. And it's all about ensuring that the supplier and the auditee, they don't stop after the audit. It's not just about having an audit, getting a report and you're done with it, but it's actually about monitoring performance and monitoring the corrective action process. So ensuring each and every non-compliance, every finding raised by the auditor is adequately corrected and improved on. So the submission and the implementation of the corrective actions are also monitored and verified by the auditors. And as soon as the auditors are satisfied with the corrective actions, they close out the findings and an audit completion letter, or in layman's terms, the certificate will be issued. And this is at the end of the day, the insurance that you need to gain the market access that you need is this audit completion letter, because that tells you that you have in fact actually improved from your audit date. So of course, the risk rating or the grading in terms of your audit outcomes is based on several intervals, and it's based on the SIZA audit frequency matrix. And depending on the number of findings that you receive and the risk rating of each of these findings, you will receive an overall grading of either platinum, gold, silver, or bronze. And in terms of platinum rating, that means, just for example, that you will have less than 10 minor non-compliances, and you will then receive an audit validity of 3 years. So this is another way to save cost and time for the supply chain, as there's no expectation that you have to audit every year if you are in fact a platinum member. And this is also benchmarked against global markets, and it's quite fantastic that the global markets actually accept this audit frequency matrix. Again, just to give you a little bit better of an understanding in terms of the social audits for SIZA and the growth. If we look at 2020, just there you'll see the number of audits that were conducted, and you will note that we had quite a spike in May month last year. And this is even with the COVID scenario that South Africa experienced, or that the world experienced, in fact. And on median, you look at around 55 social audits that are conducted every month. If we look over the past few years, since 2016 until now, the 2020-21 year, audits have almost doubled to just under 700 social compliance audits that were conducted, or SIZA social audits that were conducted in South Africa. And then if we look at the projected audits going forward, within the next 3 to 5 years, we will probably end up around 800, 850 social compliance audits in terms of the SIZA program. Another important part of the SIZA program is, of course, the environmental standard, or the environmental module that goes along with it. As we all know, sustainability takes into account a variety of facets and factors which need to be taken into account within a business if you would like to operate sustainable, and I think more importantly, if you would like to showcase to your markets or to your value chain that you are in fact operating accordingly. So the SIZA environmental standard is based on the 4 cornerstones of the environment. So if you look at healthy soil management, water management, biodiversity and ecosystems, and then of course the responsible management of energy, materials and waste. So it is also based on South African legislation and ensures compliance with legislation such as the National Environmental Management Act, and it's based on the assessment of the associated risks to the specific hazards. So it engages with the supplier, and it ensures that they understand the concept of risk management around a particular hazard. But it's also very important that the standard, alike to the social standard, is focused on the implementation of policies and procedures. It's not just a tick box. It's about the implementation, the effective implementation of those procedures. And the standard measures the production inputs and analyzes the data and interprets the effectiveness of the current practice within that business. So an important aspect with this is target setting. So say, for example, reducing your energy usage or efficient water usage. And this is very important to measure at the end of the day. If you can't have a record, if you can't track your past, you won't be able to actually effectively and efficiently drive continuous improvement. And another important aspect in terms of SIZA environmental is the shifting to alternatives, for example, renewable energy, where there's a focus, like I mentioned earlier, the drive towards best practice, where it's not just good enough sometimes to just do what you have to do, meet minimum legislative requirements, but it's important to actually drive an approach which will enhance your environment and enhance the people working in that environment. And just in terms of this year coming up, we are implementing new digital monitoring tools as part of the SIZA program, which will benefit both the market, the buyer, as well as the producer. So it will allow an active and interactive monitoring tool on the MySIZA platform, where buyers can actually and the producers can actually measure their performance, measure their KPIs, and track their performance going forward. As part of the SIZA environmental program, we have the SIZA Carers program, which is a second-party verification process. And as everyone has an impact on the natural resources, we need to, as a collective management, conserve the natural resources that we do have left not just in South Africa, but globally as well. So this program is based on a sample size where in-house environmental verification is conducted by SIZA environmental specialists. And the goal is to verify the environmental self-assessment questionnaire, which is completed by the member every year, but also to assist the growers with very site-specific improvements. You know, a river doesn't look the same on one farm to another, or one processing facility has other challenges to another. And this is very important so that people can actually go out, assist growers with site-specific improvements, and thereby driving continuous improvement throughout the entire value chain. This program is, of course, included in their membership, and it's also cost-free for SIZA members. And it's very important to note that this is not a third-party audit. So this excludes the third-party audit process. However, there is an environmental third-party audit that can take place. BSI is also a recognized audit company for SIZA Environmental. And these audits are specifically based on member and market request. And there's an option to select it as a combined solution with your global gap IFA. As we all know, the majority of the agri-industry already does global gap audits. So in order, again, to drive a cost and time-effective approach, they can do this audit in combination with the global gap IFA, which will allow them to save cost and time. So this will mean that the audit company will need to be the same audit company and the same auditor, which would need to be recognized by SIZA. And the goal is to measure performance against the SIZA environmental standard and thereby gaining the market access. The outputs, it's the same as with SIZA Social. There's a very lengthy audit report and corrective action plan, which will be issued along with the responsibility to the auditee to actually complete the corrective actions for all those non-compliances. And after each and every non-compliance has been adequately corrected, an environmental audit completion letter will be issued, again within the same intervals or based on the same risk frequency matrix as with social, where the supplier will either receive a platinum valid for 3 years, gold or silver valid for 2 years, or a bronze, meaning that they will need to be audited within the next season again. So a crucial aspect to, I think, mention in terms of the SIZA program as a whole, it's not just about managing the risk for the market, but it's also managing the risk for the member. It is focused on continuous improvement. It drives an approach where we try and shift the mindset to aiming for best practice and to make it part of a lifestyle rather than just having a tick box, having a checklist, completing it, and making sure that you actually meet the minimum legal requirements. Aspects such as the between audit monitoring assists us with this, where we can actually go to the site and actually give them site-specific recommendations and highlight the possible areas that require improvement. It's the same with our dedicated audit oversight, where we actually chase growers or members or auditees throughout the value chain. After every audit, we make sure that each and every non-compliance is adequately corrected and that evidence of that improvement and corrective action is in fact submitted and evaluated by the auditor. We don't just leave it there and that they get the audit report and they leave. We try and make sure that they actively drive this continuous improvement process. We have a very hands-on approach. We engage directly with our members, we engage directly with markets, with the audit companies, to ensure that we understand where the needs are throughout this chain. And of course, we offer on-farm assistance, not only with our online platform, but you'll see their social and environmental compliance training is another aspect that we offer to our members, along with the strict competency requirements that we measure on both the auditors and the audit company side. Of course, we have a capacity building section as well, where we offer training, improvement, as well as the emerging grower program to get growers ready for their audits. To give you some insight into the audit oversight process and how we ensure that our auditors are actually remaining competent, like I said, we have a rigorous third-party audit oversight process, and this is done by regularly engaging with each and every audit company, each and every auditor, making sure they understand the SIZA program, so that the audit outcome at the end of the day can be trusted and it's reliable to the markets and the buyers across the world. So this engagement includes our competency monitoring on an annual basis. We do quality reviews of every audit report. We ensure that there's annual training available, an annual auditor competency assessment that needs to be done. We provide thorough oversight and review of the audit process, and there's regular engagement with members to allow for feedback after an audit. So once an audit's completed, we ensure that the auditors can actually be evaluated through the members providing us with feedback on what is happening and how they experience the audit. And we can thereby identify any possible issues or gaps where specific attention might be needed. We, of course, try our best to provide an objective and credible complaints and disputes process, and our procedures are quite airtight in this regard, where we ensure that in any case auditee does not agree with a particular finding, they have the right to log a dispute, and this dispute then follows the formal SIZA audit dispute process. And the same with complaints, whether the complaints are towards the auditors or whether it might be agri-worker complaints or interested stakeholders that might want to raise a complaint towards a specific business. SIZA can then engage with that process and actually try and resolve those complaints as soon as possible. And there's, of course, various security systems in place on the MySIZA platform, built in such a way to ensure that there's no corruption that can take place, there's no manipulation of data, and this all contributes to the reliability and the trustworthiness of the SIZA audit and the audit outcome. In terms of critical findings, over the 2020 year, SIZA received quite a few, about 5 critical findings were reported on 4 member sites over that period. Just to give you some background, the SIZA alert notification is raised when a critical finding has been logged by an auditor, and this is then communicated to the buyers. But it's very important, it's not there to penalize the grower or the auditee in any way. It is actually to engage throughout the value chain. So it's about ensuring that the exporter, the importer, or their direct buyer, their marketer, everybody can hold hands, sit around a table and see how they can assist this particular business in actually correcting that particular issue or that critical finding. Just as some background, some of the critical alerts that we did receive, it revolved around piece workers or piece rate workers not receiving minimum wage. There was also some underpayment of the seasonal employees, no contracts were available for seasonal employees. And then we also received a critical notification around communal accommodation that was quite unsafe and hygienic, also particularly towards seasonal employees. And then we also had a critical non-compliance regarding abusive language that was used by management towards employees. We can actually say that all these critical findings have been adequately resolved over the past year and that they are all closed out by the audit company. In terms of audit disputes, I mentioned earlier that we run a fairly credible audit dispute procedure where if in any event a business does not agree with an auditor's finding, they can raise this dispute. SIZA then sends this dispute to the SIZA Audit Expert Group. So this expert group consists of legal experts, such as lawyers, people with audit experience, retired people from the industry, people from the agricultural industry specifically and from the value chain, all who then anonymously review this dispute. They don't know who the audit company is, who the auditor or the audit team is, they don't know who the producer is or the business, and they can then provide us with an anonymous opinion. And based on the majority of opinions, SIZA can then discuss this with the audit manager or the audit firm, and an outcome can be reached whether the finding will remain the same or whether the finding will in fact be amended. So just very quickly or briefly, in terms of 2020 year, we received 13 audit disputes. It consisted of disputes regarding verbal abuse between management and workers. There was a dispute raised on employees cooking and accommodation, which is still a great concern. There's a lot of cultural aspects that goes along with it, but in terms of responsible management system, there needs to be an alternative cooking area at least. And the calculation of rest periods during and after shift work was disputed. There was also some disputes regarding the incorrect payment of overtime, and this is quite a common dispute we received. There's still a common misperception, I think, in not just in agriculture, but in general business, in the business world around the calculation of overtime, that you can fill up hours, for example, or that overtime is only payable after you've reached your 45 hours and regardless of the number of hours you work per day, etc. There was also a dispute around the incorrect information that was provided to the audit company. And this we also find quite a lot where, and I do believe the panelist Charlene Holm will also speak about this, is that the important role that the SAQ actually plays in scheduling the audit and managing the audit. But if incorrect information is provided to the audit firm prior to the audit, it influences the audit planning, it influences the audit days, the length of the audit, and the outcome of the audit. And at the end of the day, the SIZA program is built in such a way where a finding or a non-compliance can actually be raised in this instance, because it speaks to responsible management systems. There was also disputes raised on the interpretation of rest periods and meal breaks after 5 hours of work or any time thereafter. For interest's sake, it is actually directly after 5 hours of work, but there was some lack of clarity in terms of the legal interpretation regarding that one. And we also received issues around the democratic election of worker representatives, whether management can have a role or an influence in the election process or not. And then in general, the majority of disputes also took into account the dissatisfaction from the business regarding the severity of the rating. When it was raised as a major and they would have liked it to be downgraded to a minor. I mentioned earlier, as part of our capacity building, we ensure that emerging growers have the opportunity to get market ready. And this is done where the SIZA program actually offers a subsidized membership to these emerging growers, where they belong to a 3-year program where experts and people with knowledge in the industry can actually go and have a hands-on support to engaging with these emerging growers, assisting them to not only comply to legislation, but comply to the SIZA standards and the program requirements. They assist them with the implementation of these requirements. At the end of the day, they would like to become compliant to access certain markets. And once they become compliant, they can be asked to audit it, and they will move over to a level 1A for the SIZA program. And they can then start to implement program requirements continuously going forward. The SIZA program offers a variety of toolkits in communication as part of our assistance to members and growers. And I'll just quickly have a read through, but you are most welcome to contact anyone at the SIZA office if you would like to make use of any of these resources. But we of course offer the farm visits and the SIZA Cares program, which gives assistance to these growers and businesses in terms of the implementation of the SIZA program. We offer the SIZA Caring and Environmental Management videos. These training videos are freely available on our website as well. We offer training videos for agri workers on social compliance. These videos are also available in low resolution and it can be shared on platforms such as WhatsApp. We offer producer compliance training and webinars quite regularly. Of course, as we spoke about the auditor competency training, which is conducted annually. We provide guidance on environmental legislation training, which is a new training that we just recently developed, which will be launched now in April. And this will provide producers with a better understanding of how to interpret the specific legal requirements in terms of the environmental legislation in South Africa, which can be daunting for anyone who has never worked in an industry or in a setting where you need to interpret the National Environmental Management Act. And so this will give them a little bit better of an understanding and provide or equip them with tools to handle and manage it better. We also have another new training, Understanding Audit Findings, which will be offered to our members from next month onwards. And this training will give businesses a better insight into understanding the findings raised by auditors and understanding how to implement effective corrective action and understanding risk assessment around these particular findings. We also offer, of course, a range of induction videos, newsletters, informative posters, and of course, we have a website filled with library. So very quickly, in terms of our main concerns, audit price. Again, this is something that we deal with quite regularly, is that members or businesses do not necessarily understand the third-party audit process. I believe Ms. Charlene Holland will also speak around quotations and how they determine audit price. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of factors that are taken into consideration. And I think just because of a misunderstanding, it is sometimes interpreted negatively. Auditor conduct and attitude also ties into auditors creating unrest under workers. It is a big focal point for SIZA. We are aware of several evaluations stating that auditors leave the site and that it creates unrest between management and workers. And there are plans in place, and we monitor the auditors, and we include this in our trainings to ensure that there's an understanding of how auditors leave farms or leave businesses after an audit. It is, of course, also important to note that there is a clinical sense to auditing. I know that social compliance audits isn't always that clinical, but these auditors are monitored not only by SIZA and the audit firms, but also by international regulating bodies such as APSCA, where they need to annually report back on their competency. So there is measures in place to ensure that auditors are calibrated in doing the correct thing and the right thing all throughout. We also have concerns around audits having to take place during peak season. There's a lot of reasons for this. Markets or businesses want to see an evaluation during the highest risk period within a business, which would then be peak season. In agriculture, you would look at your harvest season or your packing season. And for social compliance audits, it also allows for an adequate sample of the workforce to be present and to be drawn to do the interviews with. There was also some concerns around audit firms changing the dates of audits quite regularly, and this stems to the communication part. And communication is key from both the auditee and the audit company and the schedulers to ensure that quotations are handed out early enough, that the SAQ is completed long before the audit, that the audit planning becomes part of the lifestyle of the business. And it's not something that I realize on a Wednesday that my audit's expiring on a Friday and I need to arrange an audit and get everything done within a few days. That is not realistic, and that will most likely not happen. Of course, people don't understand the importance of the SAQ, the role it plays, the information that's relayed through the SAQ. People don't complete corrective actions in time, which influences their audit validity. So if they don't submit their corrective actions in time before the deadline is allocated by the auditor, unfortunately, their audit will only be valid for one season, regardless of their risk rating. And people are not actively participating in the continuous improvement approach, and they use this audit only as a mere checklist exercise. There's some unawareness from management in terms of the program, the requirements, how the third-party audit process works, regardless of the number of communications that's sent out. And of course, there's just overall wrong perceptions of SIZA, the program, and the intentions of the audit companies and SIZA's intentions. And it truly is to drive a more cost-effective and time-effective approach, and making sure that a foundation for continuous improvement is built for South African suppliers. Thank you very much.
That's a lot to absorb, and I know we didn't even really get into the detail of the importance of the some of the important requirements. A couple of questions, if I can, before I hand over to Charlene. I'm sure Charlene will cover some of these aspects, but why the focus on agriculture only?
And so I think the focus of agriculture is mainly just because of how the program started back in the day.
Okay.
And in 2008, the fruit industry realized that there's a big need for South Africans to minimize costs around audits and to minimize the exposure to a variety of standards and market requirements. So the main thing here was that in order to export, as it started in the fruit industry mainly and in the wine industry, in order to export and in order to gain market access, you need to do various audits, various retailer audits, and various standards. And it ended up being very costly. It took a lot of time, and it wasn't the best option for the South African supply chain. So the fruit industry, it started within the fruit industry. And it, like I said earlier, we are now a multi-stakeholder agri-wide approach. So the agriculture aspect in terms of primary production forms such a big part of the South African supply chain and South African export and local produce market. And there's such a big need. I mean, SIZA was approached a couple of times by international standards in other countries to implement a similar program or a similar standard there as well. But the problem is that there's still so much that needs to be done in the South African supply chain. And that's why SIZA decided to stay within South Africa for now and see how we can ensure that the South African agri and primary supply value chain becomes compliant.
Okay, so that's, I mean, I think local is lekker, and I think it's, you know, we all want to see things that are developed within our own country, but the fact of the matter is that if you want to export and you want to play with the big boys, you have to play with the big boy rules. So the big boy rules, you mentioned FedEx, and you know, I think, you know, and you mentioned the fact that the scheme is accepted, I think you said in 29 countries. I mean, is that really acceptance, or do you still find that there are producers that are required to have your audit as well as, you know, another ethical audit because that's what their customer wants?
Thank you. Yes, it does happen, unfortunately. So in those cases, we usually urge those producers or those businesses to contact SIZA, because it will be good for us to engage with those particular markets, because sometimes it is just a miscommunication. We have very recently actually found out that there is just some communication or lack of communication between various departments within a specific retailer, for example, where the SIZA program is accepted, but another department accidentally communicates to their supply chain that they need to also conduct another ethical audit. So sometimes it's just efficiencies that needs to be sorted out. But unfortunately, yes, regardless of the amount of effort everybody does, the big boys, the markets, the buyers on the other side, they are the ones that makes the decisions. But I think SIZA is at a very good level in terms of sitting across the table with almost 300 of these markets across the world in gaining acceptance. And we gain new markets every year, so it will be good to discuss this with those that still require duplication.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's, you know, ultimately money makes the world go around, not unfortunately, not, you know, ethics and social mechanisms and food safety and all the things that we think it should. Last question: when it comes to the aspects around the increase in the number, I mean, that's great, you know, that there are more and more companies buying into this process. Again, do you see this coming purely as a result of market pressure? So this is not necessarily voluntary growth in the market. We all just think this is the best thing since sliced bread. It's not just, that's not the driving force. The driving force, unfortunately, is still coming from customers.
Yes, I think it's a combination of factors. One will definitely be the market pressure. As SIZA gains more market acceptance, there's of course more pressure from a variety of other markets to also have the SIZA program implemented. But I also believe it's because of the great initiatives and interactions within the South African supply chains, or within the value chain as a whole. I think in the past, you only looked at 1 or 2 or 3 commodities that were able to comply to these various market requirements, and it has escalated to include certain commodities or production facilities that never were part of these programs. I mean, we were now recently, we have met with a lot of food manufacturers who they're just used to doing FSSC or used to doing you know, HACCP or a food safety audit. And now they are willingly, voluntarily, actually joining a program such as SIZA, because they can actually see the benefit in the program for their specific business and for their employees. So it's definitely a combination factor between market pressure and people actually seeing the value the program has for them.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Linda, for the introduction. And of course, Werner, thank you very much for all the information that you have provided us with. The focus of my presentation today will be around the social responsibility component in the food value chain. And I thought it was important to lay the foundation and to just briefly touch on the different audit solutions, of which Werner has now touched on SIZA, that the industry is offering before we focus on obviously the generic audit process and what can make the audit go wrong. We will then also end the presentation with a quick discussion on what you should expect from your audit body and your auditor. And we will also provide you with a few good tips on how to prepare for your audit. So Werner has briefly touched on the social compliance or the SIZA audits, which is giving us the opportunity of an ethical audit as well as an environmental audit. And then, of course, operating in the agricultural industry, as Werner mentioned. And then we have VITA, which also has an ethical audit or standard that is sought after by our customers and suppliers, and they specifically focus on the wine industry. We then have the SMETOP audit, and what is important to note here is, of course, the difference between the 2-pillar and the 4-pillar audit. The 2-pillar audit is focused around labour standards and health and safety, and the 4-pillar audit will then cover labour standards, health and safety, but will offer 2 additional pillars, which are then business ethics and environment. And then also, very important, we have our global gap solution, which is a farm assurance program focused around good agricultural practices. But good agricultural practices, as we know, is not just about products, it's also about people. So the global gap add-on grasp is then committed to the workers' health and safety and welfare. I think what is important on this slide for me, apart from the different options, is then, of course, the various combination audit offerings that are available. So all of these programs that we have now mentioned are recognizing the very important work of each other's programs, and they are committed to help to reduce the number of audits for the producers. So these 4 programs or standard holders as an agreement to either allow combined audits like what we see with VITA and SIZA, or to provide visibility on the outcome of the audit on multiple platforms like we see in the case of SIZA and SEDEX and VITA and SEDEX. And this can be done with either no or very little audit, additional audit time. So please reach out to us if you need more information on the combined audit options. So, and now I've got, there we go. So quickly going through the pre-audit process, because Werner has touched on the SAQ quite a bit in his presentation. So the first step in the audit process is to complete the SAQ. The SAQ then needs to be approved by the program holder. Once that is done, you can request your quote or proposal from BSI. If you're happy with the proposal, you will launch the request in the different platforms, whether SIZA or VITA or SEDEX. And then the BSI operations team will contact you with proposed audit dates. Once you have agreed on those audit dates, BSI will confirm the audit, the auditor and the audit date with you as an organization. And then finally, and most importantly, the lead auditor will confirm the audit plan and the final arrangements for the audit. So I always say that the foundation of an audit starts with the application, and Werner has really touched on that a lot. We don't want the audit to start off on shaky ground. So during this section, we are going to look at the potential problems that are likely to occur during the audit as an outcome or a result of an inconsistent or incomplete application. So we must also touch on, or we will also touch on some of the solutions with some of these common issues. So to set the foundation for this section again, it's important to note, and Werner has touched on this many times, that the time that is spent on site by the auditor has a significant impact on the validity and the integrity of the audit. And it will also determine the completion of the audit. You will notice that each of the elements that we will cover will bring back a very important question. Did we make provision for enough time to complete the audit to the program audit process and methodology requirements? But most important, to add value to the client and to identify the risks associated with the implementation and management of the social compliance management system. So the SAQ, which again Werner touched on quite a few times, the first common issue is incorrect or inconsistent information. So there are two very important documentation. The self-assessment questionnaire, SAQ, and the client information form. And I almost want to go as far as to say that these documents will determine the spirit of the audit going forward. So why is it important to supply the correct information on these two documents? So the information on the SAQ is the basis of the site's own readiness and preparation for the audit. So it's therefore important that the information that you provide is honest and truthful. The information will also be used by the auditor to set the audit plan or the audit agenda, and we will talk a lot around that a little bit later. And it will also guide the auditor in terms of the specific high-risk areas that should be focused on during the audit. The client information form will provide the auditor with perimeter information about the site to do proper planning and to ensure that all the activities and sites are included in the planning during the audit. It will avoid the need for the auditor to come back to the site at a later stage to complete the audit. Vital here, as I've got here last on the slide, make sure that your SAQ has been approved by your program holder before you apply to a certification body for the audit. If your SAQ has not been approved, your audit might not be accepted by the program owner. So again, continuing with incorrect or inconsistent information, other very important information on the SAQ and the CIF, which is often completed incorrectly or admitted completely, is the worker numbers. We will often find that the producer or the applicant auditee will exclude certain workers from the worker numbers, like migrant workers, immigrant workers, casual workers, and our favorite topics, temporary labour services. It's important to note that the audit can only take place when 66% of the total number of all workers during peak season are present. Worker numbers, as well as the combination of worker types, have a specific influence on the number of interviews that should be conducted and can therefore be one of the reasons why the audit cannot be completed during the arranged time of the site. The auditor will then have to arrange additional time to come back at additional costs, which often might not have been approved by management, and it is not provided for. There is also a real risk that the certification body might not be able to accommodate the additional time before the expiry date of your certificate. So very, very important to provide the correct information in your SAQ and client information form. Some of the other issues that we have is that not all activities and sites are listed on the CIF or the SAQ. And what does this mean? So it means that the auditor will not be able to audit all the activities that form part of that legal entity, which again means that the auditor will have to come back at a later stage to finish the audit. So important, please note, all your pack houses, all your chemical stores, housing, cellars, all of those different product PUCs should be listed when you complete your client information form. Again, just language. Language is very important, as the worker interviews needs to be conducted in a language that's understandable to the worker. If the language need is not noted on the SAQ or the CIF, the auditor will not be able to conduct a meaningful interview. It also helps the certification body to determine if there's a need for an interpreter. Membership level incorrect. For instance, the producer will apply as a single site where it's actually a multi-site, and then of course distances between the different sites omitted or not correctly stated. So when the auditor arrive on site or for the opening meeting, they realize that the different sites are quite far from one another, and again the auditor might not be able to complete the audit in time. Pitfall number 2, staff not available for the interview. Interviews are a vital part of the ethical or the social compliance audit process. And it's important that you understand who should be available on site for interviews during the audit. It is important that the auditor interview a representative sample of the size of the workforce, and that sufficient time is allocated for the interviews. Each of the programs have a very specific requirement on how to conduct the interviews, and the interviews will be a balanced approach, including all workers by gender, designation, worker type, representative of all sites and departments. So really important that you give us the correct numbers. Briefly touching on tests, because I know there's a lot of misunderstanding around temporary employment services. So when will the workers of TESS need to be on site and available for interviews? So if the TESS is certified with BSI and SIZA, the workers do not need to be available on the day of the audit, but the auditor will look at all the relevant documentation as per the standards requirements, and it must be available to the auditor on the day of the audit. If the TESS is not registered or certified with BSI and SIZA, the workers must be available for the interview during the time of the audit. And then, of course, all relevant documentation will be looked at by the auditor during the time of the audit. What is quite important here is to know and understand that it is the duty of the producer to assist the TESS to get through the certification process. Pitfall number 3, not all production units operational at the time of the audit. Werner also briefly touched on the different seasons for different activities. Again, it is important to note that the audit is only completed once the evaluation of all sections and activities of the legal entity has been completed. It is recognized that there are circumstances beyond the control of the auditee. For instance, when the site has different peak seasons in terms of certain activities. An example is harvesting and packing, and the site will need an evaluation during both seasons by the same audit team. What you can do here is to discuss this with the program owner and your certification body to come up with a solution. But in many cases, specifically when we do a combined SIZA-Vita audit, the solution might be to revise the audit cycle by bringing the audit date forward rather than to delay the audit. And then, of course, the other alternative is to apply for a bridging or a waiver letter. And then, of course, extraordinary events. So COVID-19 is a perfect example of what we recently had, and both SIZA and Vita has recognized this as an extraordinary event, and in many cases, auditees could apply for a waiver or a bridging. So one of the other pitfalls, and Werner touched on that as well, is previous findings that have not been actioned or implemented at the time of the follow-up audit. This might result in the auditor, depending on the previous grade of the finding, raise either a major or a critical, as it does show that there is a lack of commitment to the corrective action process, and in the end, the social code. The role of the landlord. This can often be a weak area as the farm or the facility is rented. The management of the facility in accordance with the requirements by national and local law is the responsibility of the employer. It's very important that we remember that. So please ensure that as a producer, as an employer, you have access to all the appropriate building plans, permits, licenses, inspection reports that are required by law and by the standard at the time of the audit. Then, of course, housing. I know, Werner, we've raised many findings around housing in the past, and there's also obviously different perceptions on housing and interpretation of the requirements. But in one of the most common concerns is that we often get to the audit, and then it's confirmed during the audit that the employer is renting housing for the workers at another facility or farm. But that was again not included in the SAQ or the client information form. Two common issues. It's not included in the audit plan, so we might not be able to finish the audit in time because we might not be able to travel to the other site to go and have a look at the housing. And the other thing is that the management of the facility is not done in accordance with the requirements of the standard and the law, because this housing is only rented from somebody else. I think one of the other very important discussion points at the moment, and of course pitfall 7, is the role of the consultant. So do you want your consultant to have visibility on your profile? SIZA has the option for the consultant to register as a level 8 member, and the consultant can then be linked to the farm as a secondary contact and will be able to review the producer's profile. Producers often make use of secondary consultants who are involved in the implementation and the handling and advising of the social compliance standard. And it is important to note that the agreement that you have with the consultant is an agreement between you and the consultant. But as SIZA, VITAS, SEDEX, and your certification body, our agreement is with you as the producer, and no information can be shared with your consultant without the written permission of the producer. And this option that SIZA is giving on the level 8 membership solves a lot of these issues. What is also then important during and after the audit is that the consultant can only handle disputes on behalf of the producer with the written permission of the producer, and of course in the case where SIZA has approved them as a level 8 member. So the consultant cannot raise disputes directly to us as a certification body or to SIZA or VITA if there's no written approval from or permission from you as the producer. Pitfall 8, the role of top management. It's important to note the requirement of the standard. The business shall appoint a senior member of management who shall be responsible for the overall implementation and management of the ethical management system. Auditors should be able to determine active involvement and participation from business leaders within the company. The responsibility lies with senior and top management to build a more positive and sustainable work culture. And auditors are playing a critical role in establishing an adequate evaluation on this commitment from the business. Pitfall 9, access to documentation. Ensure that your auditor has access to the documentation at the time of the audit. We often get to an audit and we have the opening meeting, and only during the opening meeting the auditee will notify us that actually some of the records, the HR records, are at another site. And that makes the audit very difficult because, again, the auditor did not make provision for that in the planning, and we might not be able to complete the audit in time. So important that you note in your SAQ or client information form if the access to documentation are at various sites so that we can include that in our audit planning. So what to expect from your auditor and your certification body? So auditing is characterized by reliance on a number of principles, and these principles should help the audit to be an effective and reliable tool. I will briefly touch on some of the principles. I'm not going to cover all of them. Of course, integrity, very important for the foundation of professionalism, and of course for a social and ethical compliance audit. It is required from the auditor to give a fair presentation on what was noted at the site. It is the obligation of the auditor to report truthfully and accurately. Confidentiality of utmost importance. Again, hence the reason why information cannot just be given to a consultant. The audit is an evidence-based approach. We sometimes, I almost want to say, want to forget that it's evidence-based approach. And then you as an auditee also have the right to proper communication and planning from your certification body, and you have a right to a competent audit team in the area of social compliance. So what happens on the day of the audit? So I will briefly just quickly go to the on-site activity. So we obviously have the opening meeting, we have our employment site tour, we do our interviews with the management and the workers, and sometimes some of the interviews can happen during the site tour. The auditor will then often go and do the document review, and a lot of that can be based on the outcome of the interviews. Then the audit team will meet for a pre-closing meeting. Then the auditee and the audit team will agree on the corrective actions, and the auditor will also communicate the non-conformities at this time. Of course, non-conformities are communicated right throughout the audit, and that is very important, that you as an auditee are not surprised with non-conformities or areas of concern during the closing meeting. In the closing meeting is then a summarized version of everything that was communicated with the various audit team members during the audit. from both the auditee side as well as the certification body side. So how to prepare for the audit? Very important. Get the standard, make sure that you've got the correct version of the standard and that all applicable personnel have been trained. Visit the website. Werner spoke a lot about the different toolkits available specifically from SIZA. Vita's got the same and SEDEX has got the same. Those toolkits can help you to prepare for all the different elements of the standard. There's some fantastic YouTube videos available now from SIZA, so please go and visit the website. Again, just review your SAQ. Make sure that you've captured all the correct information and make sure that the areas that you were weak in, you've actually implemented corrective action. A vital other point is that when you choose to conduct combined audits, make sure that your certification body is actually approved to conduct all those combined audits. Make sure that all your previous findings have been addressed. Review the audit plan and agenda that you have received from your auditor. Confirm that all the activities and sites that are under the management of the legal entity are included in the audit plan. If not, notify your auditor, notify your certification body. And then lastly, confirm that everybody is aware of the audit and the audit plan, and that all relevant process owners are available for the audit as per the audit plan. This includes top management. The person responsible for the implementation and the management of the standard and the program requirements must be present on the day of the audit. Don't just leave it for the consultant. It's very important that the producers, internal management are involved during the audit so that the implementation of the policies and the procedures can be proven and comfortably evaluated. Thank you, Linda. That is all from my side.
When it comes to the protocols that you've mentioned, I think you're very, I really appreciate the fact that you've highlighted some of the benefits of obviously going with the BSI, but most importantly, some of the shortcomings that you often see from time to time within the auditing process. And I think there's always a lot of focus on the auditor, but the better the auditee is prepared, the better the audit will actually go. Am I right?
Absolutely, 100%. And Linda also said if it's a prepared auditee, it sets the spirit of the audit.
Absolutely, absolutely. One last point, and I just want to come back to what Werner said about, sometimes there's disputes or there's criticism levels at the auditor for creating employee dissatisfaction or unrest as a result of this audit. I can appreciate that some of these aspects are quite subjective. Some of these aspects are also quite contentious. How do you manage this within the BSI?
Yeah, that is, as you say, Linda, really an important point. I think what is important is to note that these auditors are trained to be able to handle interviews. If at any time the interview was conducted in a way or the outcome of the interview is that there are unrest or all of a sudden employees that were happy in the past are now unhappy, it is really, really vital that the auditee contact the certification body and notify them. And of course, it is always important to communicate to the program owner as well, because that is something that we need to deal with. The spirit of the audit is definitely to make the employee as well as the employer life better after the audit and not to make it worse.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the intention at the end of the day is to try and create a balanced and fair working environment that benefits all, and most importantly, make sure that the business is successful, because that way we all have a job. And job security is important to workers as well as to the owners. Thank you, Charlene. I have to say, people, it's not often that you get the auditors telling you what you need to look out for the audit. So you should appreciate all of this information that Charlene has shared so openly today. We're going to end it here, but this is not the end, because you're definitely going to be hearing from both the BSI and from SIZA going forward with more information. Please, you're welcome to reach out to us with more questions if you haven't had the opportunity to jot them down, or if something kind of strikes you after this presentation, please feel free to reach out to Charlene. You can see her details on the screen so that she can guide you appropriately. Charlene, to the BSI, thank you so much for sponsoring this webinar today. It has been very, very informative. To Werner, thank you very much for sharing the SIZA protocol and some of the great work that you're doing out there in the marketplace to make agri more ethical. And we look forward to hearing even more about the development of this scheme in the future. Thank you so much. And won't the two of you just say your goodbyes, and then we'll finish off for today.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you, Charlene.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Linda, for the opportunity, and thank you for everybody that joined our webinar today.
Thank you all. Keep well.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good Wednesday. Chat to you soon.